This is a tutorial on the California Residential Purchase Agreement, the CAR form RPA. When you open that form up, you're going to see it's actually a bundle. It starts with a real estate agency disclosure, a 2-page form that's required by state law, very easy to fill out. It's all boilerplate text. You simply put in the name of your client here and you sign. You're going to write your company name, the name of the brokerage license number. You're going to sign here as the licensee and put your license number and then date. Second page, you do nothing. It's just boilerplate text. For housing, 2-page document. Again, client's going to sign right there. So your buyer's going to sign here and date. Possible representation of more than one buyer. Boilerplate text. Buyer's going to sign there. You're going to put your firm, brokerage name, brokerage license number, date. You're going to sign as the licensee preparing this document and your personal license number here. And when you see seller and seller's brokerage firm, when you're writing the offer, you leave that blank because the listing agent can fill that out when their seller accepts or counters. Wire fraud advisory, same idea. Buyer's going to sign and you move on. And at last, we're finally at the purchase contract itself. So you'll begin by putting the date that you're preparing. The date that you're drafting this form goes up here in the top left. You're going to write your buyer's name or names on this line. I have a little bit of information in here just as a sample. I put an address, Main Street, Los Angeles. It's going to ask for the city, county, zip code, very straightforward. Assessor's parcel number, you'll find that on the MLS ID or in tax records or on the county tax assessor's website, or you can leave it blank and find it later. It's good to have it to identify the property properly, but it's not the end of the world if you can't find it. You can always add later. We're going to put a nice round $1 million sales price to make the math easy for the EMD and loan that I'll discuss below here. And then we're going to put the close of escrow date. We'll check this box. Now you can put a definitive date. If you want to put a calendar date like the end of April or something like April 30th, you could check that box and write that here. But most of the time, people are going to check this box and write 30 or 45 days. Then we're going to go down to the brokerage firm. And so you're going to put, since again, you're drafting the offer, you're going to put your brokerage firm name here, the party you're representing, the buyer. Now, of course, you could be a dual agent, but if you're just representing the buyer, you'll check that box and then you'll write your name right there as the licensee charged by this brokerage to do this transaction. And you'll put your license number here. I think it's good form to write the seller's brokerage firm. It's not a big mystery. It's on the MLS, but I see agents leave this blank, which I just think is kind of, it just looks a little sloppy or like you're rushing through the offer. If you have the information, just go ahead and write it in. All right. Initial deposit. I put $20,000. And the reason is because the deposit, earnest money deposit or EMD, is typically between 1% and 3% of the sales price. And since we did that even $1 million sales price, I just thought I'd go right in the middle at 2%, which is $20,000. So I put that there as the EMD. And then I leave all this just the way it is because the default verbiage says that the buyer will wire it, which buyers almost always do. I mean, I guess you could check one of these boxes, cashier's check or personal check, but it's not that relevant. And then you're going to go down here. So sometimes I get asked about the increased deposit. This is almost always left blank. And the reason is that this typically has to do with if there's some sort of additional provision, maybe some sort of contingency that's going to be removed later in the transaction or some second half of this transaction that may translate into higher risk for the seller. Like the buyer has some sort of stipulation, there will be an increased deposit, which would be released to the seller if the buyer is unable to perform on this contract. So without going too far off a tangent, you can leave this blank unless you think there's a need to add on to the EMD. But again, typically this is left blank. All right, all cash offer, you check this box. If not, the first loan is, and we're just going to pretend we're doing an 80-20 conventional loan. 80% of the purchase price is the loan amount, 20% down payment. So we're doing $800,000 as the 80%. You can check boxes here if you're doing an FHA loan or something like that, or there's a second loan involved. And then automatically this form will calculate $180,000, because since the buyer's putting 20% down, that's $200,000 of the $1 million sales price. $20,000 is the deposit, and there's a remaining $180,000. That's the down payment, and these two numbers make up that $200,000 20% down. And it automatically calculates the purchase price total. So this number should balance with this number up here, but it does automatically. So it's pretty straightforward. And then of course the buyer is going to initial this page. Property address is going to populate automatically here on the top of each page. By default, 17 days for the appraisal contingency, 21 days for the loan contingency. If you want to shorten those or change those, you can do so here. The buyer has 3 days to deliver verification of down payment and their pre-qualification or pre-approval letter. And I think really proof of funds and the lender's letter for the loan pre-approval, that should really be submitted with the offer. It doesn't always happen that way, but ideally, the 3 days wouldn't matter. You could just check the box and put verification attached. And we'll carry on here. If you need to incorporate any other form, you'll check the respective box, or you'll write it in under other. Check this box and write some sort of addendum or some other form, some unique scenario form that you want to add on. There's this paragraph, other terms. This is very handy because you can write in anything, virtually anything, to add on to this contract. And so sometimes I get questions as to where to add verbiage for something that comes up. Like, it could be something on the property to convey with the sale. It could be something about the property. Whatever unique scenario can be described right here, and then it becomes a provision in this contract. And then we have allocation of closing costs. Seller shall pay, natural hazard disclosure. This is required by law. Sometimes I see buyers or investor buyers try to waive it. It's not up to the buyer to waive it. It's a requirement from the state of California to the seller to furnish the buyer with this document. So, and almost always, I don't even know if I've ever seen the buyer pay for this, but the seller pays for this. Here is where you would put a termite report. You check the box, seller shall pay for the following report: pest inspection, or termite inspection, or wood destroying pest inspection, I guess would be the full name, but people typically just write termite report. So if you want to be fancy, you can write in wood destroying pest inspection. Anyway, so however you write termite here, that's where you'd put it, and then prepared by, and then you could write any reputable termite company, or seller's choice, or buyer's choice, or the name of the termite company. If you want to do another report, you could just write it here. These are blank, so you can put in whatever you want. This box should be checked. Seller shall pay for smoke alarm and carbon monoxide device installation. This is required by law. Oh, they have water heater bracing here too. This is required by law. It's very straightforward, and the seller really should be responsible, because a buyer has no business going in a house and before they're the owner and doing modifications that could result in liability on the seller if they're done improperly or not done at all. Moving on, many cities in California require some sort of government inspection or report. Find out if the city you're writing an offer in requires one. If it does, you should check this box. Ideally, it's a seller that's paying this. And then there's a cost of compliance measure. These provisions get countered out fairly often, but when this does come up, it's good to know which party is going to take responsibility. So that's why it's good to check, because it's fairly harmless to counter this out. People will counter out 7B2 and then they'll put 2, 1, and 2 on a counter to be removed from the contract or deleted from the contract. I'll see that on counter offers. That's all fine until the city requires it. So find out if the city requires anything, and if it does, which party should bear the cost. Now I'm writing this form in the method typically seen in Southern California, because transactions are done slightly differently between Northern California and Southern California. But in Northern California, I should say that it changes county to county, and sometimes even half of a county does things one way, and the other half of the county is customarily done another way. And I have a chart with all that I can furnish upon request. But Southern California makes it easier because basically what's customary is the same. It's uniform for all of Southern California. And that is both parties pay their own respective escrow fee. So that's why we have both boxes checked. And people write each party to pay their own fee, or sometimes people used to write 50-50 a lot years ago. I see it less now, but it's each pay their own. Each pay their own is typically what's written there. Escrow holder shall be. I think it's good for the buyer's agent to propose a company and then write or seller's choice, because you don't want to leave it up to a listing agent that doesn't know and they just arbitrarily choose some company with terrible service. So if you're writing an offer and you have an idea of a company that's reputable, write that in, but then you can leave it up for or seller's choice, because it's customary the seller chooses. And really we're talking about the listing agent, because I don't even think the seller knows which company's which. But typically I'll see agents write seller's choice, but I'm suggesting you write XYZ company or seller's choice. Here for owner's title insurance in Southern California, the seller pays this. So check this box and you'll write owner's title policy issued by, and you'll write in seller's choice, or what I propose to write, which is XYZ title company or seller's choice. I'm a big proponent of this title and escrow being the same company, conducted by a title company, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. Other costs. In Southern California, the seller typically pays all of these. If there's an HOA, the seller pays those. Private transfer fee is very rare. If you're concerned that it may pertain to your transaction, write if applicable here. That way, if you check seller and write if applicable, it only goes into effect when it actually exists. If it doesn't, the seller has nothing to worry about. The seller pays nothing. Seller shall pay for, buyer shall pay for. These are auxiliary lines to write in whatever you want. You could have your client, your buyer, pay for transaction coordinator fee payable to blank. Or if your company charges a transaction fee, buyer shall pay broker processing fee to and the name of your brokerage there, and that'll save you money. Again, that's another story. If you have questions about this, just reach out through the contact information in the description, and I'll be happy to elaborate. Seller shall pay for, again, seller is paying the cost not to exceed of a 1-year home warranty plan issued by buyer's choice. This should say buyer's choice. Here we're saying not to exceed a certain amount. I recommend, I like to use First American because they have a very easy to use interface on their website, and you can get quotes very quickly. Depending on the size of the house and what features you want in the home warranty, that's the number, that's the dollar amount that you're going to write here. So I'd write that, a generous dollar amount paid for by the seller, issued by buyer's choice. I think the buyer should choose, because the buyer is the party that's going to be stuck with the home warranty customer service when they need something. The seller is going to choose some cheap company, or they're not going to care. And home warranty companies are just not easy to deal with by their nature. But you'd want to at least take some responsibility in terms of which company you choose. And ideally, that company will have good customer service. Check the box AC or whatever other options that you want to have included in the home warranty. If there's no home warranty, just check this box that buyer's waiving it. This is a list of everything that is automatically included with the sale. If you want the stove, which makes a lot of sense, check this box. And refrigerator, check the box. Washer and dryer, check that box. Any additional items, write that in, because unless it's a fixture, unless it's affixed to the property or the land, it's considered a personal property and won't be left for the buyer when they move in. So it's important to, if there's any doubt about whether or not an item is going to convey with the home sale, write it in just to be safe, so it's documented. And if you want the stove, refrigerator, washer and dryer, check these boxes for sure. There's a provision here about solar. When they say leased items, it's really solar what they're referring to. Items excluded. If you want some hideous item to not convey with the property, write it in here. I'll make a side note. Keep in mind, curtains and window dressings and window treatments, as they're called, those convey. And that is seeming to be a recurring issue where sellers take curtains and blinds when they move out. All right. Buyer intends or does not intend. Will this be owner occupied? By default, it is. But if you check this box, it means that it's an investment property and will not be owner occupied. Possession of the property shall be delivered 6 p.m. on the date of close of escrow by default, or you can change it. The seller is going to remain in possession. I recommend doing a seller in possession form. It's a separate form, car form SIP. And that's for up to 30 days. If it's longer than 30 days, there's another form, residential lease after sale. Check that box there. And if there's a tenant involved, check that box, and you'll want to do some sort of tenant estoppel certificate that's going to show the terms in which the tenant is currently leasing the property, and make sure that everything is properly disclosed, that the buyer will be taking over as the landlord and the buyer knows what they're getting into with the lease. This is just a bunch of boilerplate disclosures required by law. And we're going to scroll through all this. Buyer's initialing each of these pages. There is a 17-day inspection period for the buyer. If the buyer needs less time, you can put that in here, but 17 days is the default. If the buyer removes contingencies with the offer, which we see this more often now because this is the craziest seller's market that I've seen it ever. And contingencies are being waived like I've never seen. So you'll check this box here. More boilerplate text that it's important, because when something comes up, this is what you're referring to. As a broker that handles compliance, I'm constantly going through here and parsing through these lines, because this is really what is going to solve any sort of dispute that arises, or at least it's going to give instructions on how that's to be resolved. And we're going to continue on. Liquidated damages. This is where the seller gets the deposit if the buyer breaches and does not close escrow after all the contingencies are removed. It's very important to note. If there are contingencies in place, then the buyer is protected. The deposit's not jeopardized. Once contingencies are removed, that deposit's more or less, I don't want to say an absolute, but it's very likely to be non-refundable. But parties should initial here. Mediation, arbitration as courses of action to avoid litigation. Both parties are going to initial here, and then the buyer is going to initial a third time on this page 8 of 10. So there are 3 initials total on page 8 of 10 that the buyer is initialing. We're going to scroll through more of this, definitions. If you want your offer to expire sooner than the 3rd day, which is the default time frame, you're going to check this box, write in a time and a date. An example would be if you want to put pressure on the listing agent because you're writing an offer on a Friday, or I won't even say a date. Let's just say that you're the first to write an offer and you're worried that another agent will write an offer, and you want the seller to have the pressure of responding to your offer before another offer comes in. You can shorten up that time frame by putting in 24 hours or however much time you want to give them to respond. And the buyer signs, and buyer's going to initial the page 10 is part of the agreement. You're going to put your information here as the buyer's brokerage firm. You're going to put all your information. You're going to sign it. Where it says buy, you're going to sign. And you're going to put your license number. And that's it. There's a buyer inspection advisory advising the buyer to get inspections. And then you're going to have the buyer sign. And then the California Consumer Privacy Act. I promise you this thing's coming to an end here. That is the last page. But this is just more disclosures and advisories for the buyer, for their protection, or so that they're informed as a consumer. And that's it. That is the purchase agreement in 2021. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found it informative.